It didn't roar. It didn't announce itself. At 4:38 inches the afternoon, on an ordinary Thursday in February, the mountain simply split open. A wall of dark gray ash climbed 2 kilometers into the Philippine sky in seconds. Not slowly, not gradually. Like something had been punched from below, from deep beneath the earth with impossible, ancient force. The shockwave that followed wasn't just heard. It was times felt, 30 kilometers away, in homes, in chests, in the bones of people who had lived beside this mountain their entire lives and had never once felt it shake like that. They call her Canlaon, and she is not done. There are 24 active volcanoes in the Philippines, 24 mountains that breathe, 24 places where the earth hasn't finished deciding what shape it wants to take. The Philippines sits on what geologists call the Pacific Ring of Fire, the great seismic belt that circles the Pacific Ocean like a wound that never fully heals. Earthquakes, eruptions, tsunamis. The ground here has always been restless. The people here have always known it. They have built their lives on its slopes, planted their rice in its fertile soil, buried their dead in its shadow. But what has been happening on the island of Negros since June of 2024 and accelerating violently through 2025 and into 2026 has moved beyond the ordinary restlessness that Filipinos have lived alongside for generations. This is something else. This is why scientists are watching Canlaon the way you watch a fire that has already jumped the fire break, not in panic, but in that particular quiet kind of dread that belongs only to people who understand exactly what they are looking at. Let's talk about what's actually happening and why it matters far beyond the islands of the Philippines. Canlaon volcano rises 2,465 meters above Negros Island in the Visayas region of the central Philippines. She is the highest point on the island. Her slopes are green and dense and lush in the way that only volcanic soil can be absurdly, almost aggressively fertile. Sugarcane, rice, corn, fruit that doesn't grow anywhere else quite the way it grows here. Generations of Filipino families have worked these fields, have raised children in villages that sit in the valleys below her summit, have looked up at that peak in the morning fog and felt, in the Filipino way, that the mountain was times of them. She has a 2-kilometer wide caldera at her summit, a collapsed crater that contains a lake. Beneath that lake, and beneath the smaller active vent called Lugud Crater just to the south, is a magmatic system that scientists have been studying for decades. She has erupted many times in recorded history. Most of those eruptions were what volcanologists classify as phreatic steam-driven explosions, powerful but short, caused when groundwater meets hot rock deep underground and flashes to steam with explosive force. Violent, yes. Deadly if you're close, but predictable in their own way. Contained. What began in 2024 was not phreatic. It was times magmatic, and that is a completely different category of danger. The Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology, PHIVOLCS, had been watching Canlaon since March of 2020, when a series of volcanic earthquakes prompted them to raise her alert level from 0 to 1. The mountain had been stirring in her sleep, tectonic tremors, gas emissions, the kind of low-level grumbling that volcanologists log and file and monitor without alarm. But on the 3rd of June 2024, everything changed. At 6:51 inches the evening, Canlaon erupted from her summit vent with a force that produced what scientists described as a voluminous and incandescent plume, a column of fire and ash that climbed 5,000 meters into the sky. 5 kilometers. That is nearly twice the height of the mountain itself. And with that plume came something that stopped volcanologists cold. A pyroclastic density current, racing down the south and southeastern slopes for 2 to 3 kilometers. Pyroclastic flows, the most lethal force a volcano can unleash. Not lava people survive lava. Lava is slow. You can run from lava. A pyroclastic density current is a superheated avalanche of gas, ash, and fragmented rock, traveling at speeds of up to 700 kilometers per hour at temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius. You cannot outrun it. You cannot hide from it. It follows the valleys and the gullies and the drainage channels like water, except instead of water, it is liquid fire. 57,563 people were affected by that June eruption. 3,905 were displaced. 2,680 homes were damaged. Rice fields, sugarcane plantations, the careful agricultural work of entire communities gone. The agricultural losses alone reached an estimated $3 million US dollars. In a region where farming is not just an industry, but a way of life, that number represents something far larger than money. PHIVOLCS raised the alert level to 2. The mountain was awake. Summer turned to autumn in 2024, and Canlon did not rest. In September, PHIVOLCS recorded something that sent a specific kind of chill through the scientific community, not because of what they saw, but because of a number. On the 10th of September 2024, instruments measuring sulfur dioxide emissions from Canlon recorded a single-day output of 9,985 tons of SO2. Sulfur dioxide is the gas that leaks from magma as it rises. The more SO2, the more fresh magma is pushing upward from depth. That September 10th reading was the highest ever recorded at Canlon since monitoring began in 2009. The next day, September 11th, the record was broken again. 11,556 tons of sulfur dioxide in a single day. Scientists issued a specific warning. Canlon may be undergoing its first magmatic eruption since 1902, more than a century without a true magmatic event. And now, something deep in the earth was sending fresh molten rock upward, degassing in quantities that the instruments had never before been asked to measure. The mountain was not just awake. Something underneath her was moving. The 9th of December, 2024. 3 inches the afternoon. Canlon erupted with a violence that crossed a threshold. The eruption produced a plume that climbed 4,000 meters above the vent. Pyroclastic flows raced down the southeastern slopes. A shockwave, the kind that moves through the air as a physical pressure wave, was heard and felt across multiple islands. Ashfall did not stay on Negros. It crossed the ocean. It reached Panay. It reached Guimaras. It reached Iloilo and Antique on the other side of the strait. When ash crosses the sea, it is no longer a local event. PHIVOLCS raised the alert to level 3. Evacuation orders went out across the region. 87,000 people, 87,000 men, women, children, elderly farmers, young families, infants, evacuated from their homes in the shadow of a mountain that had been a constant, familiar presence their entire lives. 46,900 of them from the single municipality of La Castellana alone. A price freeze was imposed across Negros Occidental to prevent businesses from exploiting the displaced. A tent city was erected in Himamelan. Festival celebrations scheduled for February were quietly canceled. The December eruption affected around 40,489 people in the Visayas and caused an estimated $681,000 in agricultural damage across nearly 300 hectares of land. But December was not the end. It was the beginning. In January 2025, PHIVOLCS issued a warning about something they were watching closely: increased ground swelling. The earth beneath Canlon was inflating. Magma pushing upward creates pressure, and that pressure deforms the surface of the ground in measurable ways. The changes they recorded were, in their words, similar to the conditions observed prior to the volcano's eruption in December 2024. They were telling the world, get ready, this isn't over. February brought a minor eruption. April brought something larger. On the 8th of April, 2025, Canlon exploded again, a full hour of explosive eruption from 5:51 inches the morning to 6:47, producing a 4,000-meter plume and pyroclastic flows racing down the slopes. The heat from the eruption ignited vegetation near the crater. Wildfires broke out across the volcano's upper flanks. Dry weather fanned the flames until heavy rains finally extinguished them 2 days later. More than 8,600 families, 28,272 people were displaced from 34 barangays across Negros Occidental and Negros Oriental. On April 24th, Philippine President Bongbong Marcos created a national task force specifically to manage the government's response. A volcano had forced the creation of a presidential task force. May 13th, another moderately explosive eruption, 5 minutes long. Ballistic fragments, chunks of burning rock ejected from the crater and landing hundreds of meters away, igniting vegetation on the slopes. Ashfall across multiple localities of Negros Occidental. A 6-kilometer evacuation zone recommended. Then, summer. Ash plumes in September-October. A short-lived explosive eruption on October 24th with pyroclastic flows down the southern slopes and a 2-kilometer ash cloud drifting northwest. By the time 2025 ended, Canlon had erupted or produced significant ash emissions more times in 18 months than she had in the previous decade. PHIVOLCS eventually lowered the alert to level 2 by late July 2025, but they did not lower their vigilance because the signals coming from inside the mountain had not gone quiet. The seismic tremors continued. The SO2 emissions continued. The Smithsonian Institution's Global Volcanism Program recorded sulfur dioxide readings between 550 and 2,598 tons per day through the first week of January 2026. The ground continued to swell. The magmatic system beneath Canlon was still pressurizing. The 19th of February 2026, 4:38 inches the afternoon. 2 minutes. That is how long the eruption lasted. 120 seconds. But in those 2 minutes, Canlon produced a dark gray plume that climbed 2,000 meters above the vent before being pushed southwest by high winds. She sent pyroclastic density currents racing down her southern and southwestern slopes, hot gas, ash, and rock fragments moving at lethal speeds. The shockwave from the explosion was recorded by an infrasound station 4 kilometers from the crater and was heard and physically felt more than 30 kilometers away. PHIVOLCS noted that before the eruption, they had observed something specific: slow but continuous ground inflation since June 2024, with short-term inflation beginning in late January 2026, indicating renewed pressurization. The SO2 emissions had actually dropped to 174 tons per day before the February 19th event, significantly lower than the long-term average of 2,823 tons per day, recorded since June 2024.